So much for joining us today. I am Twinkle, the host of our CAN ACS Journal Club. We try to do this virtual journal club every month. And today we have Dr. Justin Barrett with us. Thanks for joining us. Dr. Barrett is a process and research chemist at Colorado Chromatography, and he's going to be sharing with us a little bit about the work that he's been doing at Colorado Chromatography. And his background is in organic chemistry, specifically research in computational and industrial chemistry. And today this presentation is going to be on converting THC to HHC. And I will let Dr. Barrett take it away.
All right, thank you for the introduction. Good morning, everyone. So, can everyone see my screen now?
Yep, you can see the slides.
Fantastic. So, of course, my name is Dr. Justin Barrett. I work with Colorado Chromatography, and the subject of today's matter is the optimizing the asymmetric hydrogenation of Delta-8 THC. So a little bit about our company first is we're just as much of a manufacturing company as a traditional academic lab investigating these novel compounds. And so from a perspective of Colorado Chromatography, a lot of our interest spans from trying to produce these novel compounds in the industrial scale. So we kind of always been operating in this kind of nutraceutical gray market space. That's kind of where our niche is. And of course, since we also have our R&D lab, we also like to investigate how these novel compounds, the topic of today being these cannabinoids, how they can be made, how they interact with the body, and so forth. So the man of the hour is 9R or 9S-HHC, hexahydrocannabinol. And the whole difference between the two is this stereocenter here, whether the methyl group is coming towards you or away from you. And the reason that we're interested in it is these HHC compounds have been, for a couple of years now, been starting to show themselves in this recreational market. So these vape cartridges, for example. But of course, another interest, especially us in our academic pursuits, is there any kind of pharmaceutical relevance or therapeutic use for either of these epimers? There's been a lot of work towards eking out what these compounds do to your body and if there's any kind of additional use. And so I kind of want to wrap up like the pharmacological utility, the science behind why we're pretty interested in these compounds. And so we'll start with the left, and it's this beta-arrestin cannabinoid recruitment. You can basically think of this as you ingest these cannabinoids, is there going to be any kind of respiratory suppression? Is your breathing going to slow down? And we're going to compare 9S-HHC, 9R-HHC, and then Delta-9 THC. At lower doses, there's not much beta-arrestin recruitment, but as you get to your higher doses, what seems to be is that 9R-HHC is a little bit more beta-arrestin, so it might slow your breathing down. Comparing that to 9S-HHC or Delta-9 THC, within the margin of the error bars, they more or less have the same interaction. So if you were specifically looking only at this pharmacological profile and considering the choice of these compounds, 9S-HHC might be the safer epimer slightly. And then the two bar graphs on the right are investigating catalepsy or hypolocomotion with 9 and S and R HHC. Basically, you can think about this in terms of, all right, if I ingest this HHC, either epimer, how lethargic am I going to be? How much am I going to be sedated? And in terms of catalepsy, R-HHC is the far more cataleptic. You're going to be a very catatonic state compared to 9S-HHC. And the same with hyperlocomotion towards your rat studies that don't have any kind of cannabinoid in their system. The locomotion is about the same, but you do have reduced locomotion with 9R-HHC. And this all lines up with a lot of the current studies that 9R-HHC is the much more psychoactive compound. And to kind of sell you a idea, especially with like 9S-HHC, its utility is we think of like cancer patients. You're going through chemotherapy, you're going to be more anxious, you're going to have reduced appetite. And this S-epimer of HHC, while it doesn't have as much of the psychoactive properties as compared to your more traditional cannabinoids, it still binds to your cannabinoid receptors, and its profile looks to be a little bit safer. So you already have medicinal cannabinoids being prescribed to your chemotherapy patients, but this could be another tool for your doctor's toolkit, say increasing your appetite or maybe quenching some of that anxiety that you might have. And of course, with this, we want to get into the chemistry of this now. And I'm a big organic chemist, a big computational chemist, and this entire talk is going to be extremely organic chemistry heavy. And so I want to make sure that the entire audience can keep up and isn't left behind or is kind of spooked by organic chemistry. So we'll start with the top left, and this is your standard organic chemistry scaffold of delta 8. So we have the root structure in green. We have the double bond that we're really interested in this reduction highlighted in pink. We have the alcohol, the resorcinol alcohol of your cannabinoid highlighted in orange. This is of interest because we're going to be playing a lot with protecting this alcohol for our D8 or D9 THC and seeing how that influences the chemical reaction. And then we're going to have some kind of metal catalyst that we're going to add to our reaction flask. And this metal catalyst is going to transform our D8 THC into HHC. And the two models below, I'm a big Lego person. And so having these 3D models really helps me understand what's going on. And I hope you as the audience members can also appreciate these. And the entire talk is basically going to revolve around this metal catalyst and whether it's going to attack the bottom of that double bond, as in the model on the left, or it's going to attack the double bond from the top. That's the model on the right. And this entire chemistry is, okay, if we start putting things in this alcohol group, or if we change whatever the metal catalyst is, can we selectively make the metal attack from the bottom or selectively attack from the top? And that's the entire thing. With that, this research really starts with Neil Garg's paper in 2023. And so he did a hydrogen atom transfer of delta 8 and selectively was producing the 9R-HHC, an 11-to-1 ratio. Now, of course, Colorado Chromatography is definitely it's more of an industrial interest. And so while Garg's report was at a 15 milligram scale, that's really not something that you can do at the kilogram scale for a industrial production. But nonetheless, the recipe is super cool and proves you can start selectively making the R or S epimer. He also provides some binding affinity studies and functional activity studies comparing R and S HHC to delta 9 and how these bind to your cannabinoid receptors. Now, I don't really want to go through these tables, but I want to more just highlight that there's a growing body of researchers that are really interested in these cannabinoids and seriously looking into how they're going to interact with your body and your cannabinoid receptors. So I find this information extremely interesting. Our first immediate thought when we're looking at Garg's recipe was the alcohol group. So if you remember back from the illustration, beginning is that orange portion of that molecule. And so this alcohol here, our immediate thought is, oh, if we protect this alcohol, maybe we can influence that selectivity and get a greater selectivity one way or the other towards making selectively R or S. We do a similar recipe as Garg's, but we slightly tweak the recipe with a little bit less chemicals that are used, and we get similar results as him. So across all of our entries, so these R groups are, regardless of whatever protecting group we've attached to our alcohol, we'll end up with complete conversion. So we've transformed all of our delta 8 into HHC. And then the ratio of the two is more or less 90% R and 10% S. So this is fantastic. It's a improvement of Gard's recipe. Now, of course, us as Colorado Chromatography, Gard and UCLA will probably not be enthusiastic about using this recipe for production without some kind of royalty. So while cool as an academic exercise, we're still back to the drawing board of how can we create our own recipe to selectively make R or S HHC. This is about where we started our collaboration with a company called TCG Green Chem. And so we wanted their assistance in doing a catalytic screening. Is there other kind of catalysts out there that could give us the desired chemistry? And we started with the more traditional reducing catalysts. So palladium, carbon, those, sure, you'd have your conversion from HHC to, or from delta 8 to HHC, but there isn't really a lot of selection between one or the other. We even tried adding a chiral auxiliary. So you can think of this as you have a tiny spatula, adding just a drop of this auxiliary to try to eke out influence and increase selectivity towards one or the other. And we use some really exotic ones like europium acetate. But again, no true real conversion from one to the other. We've also used Wilkinson's catalyst and Crabtree's catalyst, and those didn't have any kind of reaction whatsoever. And this slide is not comprehensive whatsoever. TCG, Green Chem, and us, we have an Excel spreadsheet that's miles long with all the different kinds of reactions and conditions, auxiliaries, everything under the sun trying to influence this conversion, this selectivity. The takeaway message I just want to leave you with is that we tried everything, it just for whatever reason, it just didn't work. And this was rather discouraging. We then had a hit with a false catalyst. So it's this iridium 3-FOX catalyst, and it selects towards the SHHC epimer. So you can start with either delta 8 or delta 9, your catalyst in methanol, and you can select towards the 9-SHHC. And so I kind of want to walk you through some of the highlights of this rather long table. So entry 1 through 4 are unprotected delta 8. And by itself, you would have the R catalyst, and you would assume that the R catalyst would make RHHC, but selects for S. 2 is textbook. The S catalyst makes SHHC, all right. 3 is textbook. R catalyst makes selectively towards the RHHC. And the 4th is another version of the S catalyst, SHC. All right, this is fine, but 3 of the 4 are making S versus the R. So that's kind of interesting. Let's probe it a little bit further. And so the next 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8 are a methyl protecting group. We kind of started to turn off that alcohol chemically. And the immediate thing is 7 doesn't work, but all the rest of them effectively only make 9-SHHC. Okay, cool, we're on to something. The 9, 10, 11, 12 are interesting because we start with delta 9 THC. Maybe the orientation of that double bond for one region versus another, maybe that might have a greater influence of selectively making one or the other. And of course, that across the board primarily makes 9-SHHC. And through probing the reaction and monitoring the reaction, it's more of that the delta 9 doesn't interact with the metal catalyst directly. It isomerizes first from delta 9 to delta 8, and then that delta 8 species proceeds through the chemical reaction. But with the data of the methylated alcohol, we thought, well, let's put something really bulky on there, something that really turned off that alcohol of delta 8. And we ended up with those 4 different catalysts, complete conversion, and almost selectively making the 9S-HHC. This is great, except there's something really weird. Usually this catalyst and how it operates is, like I said earlier, R makes R, S makes S. But we're only making S. So then the real chin scratcher becomes, what's going on? And so I kind of want to walk through the catalytic cycle of what's going on, and then I'll get to these models so that people who aren't really organic chemists can have a better visual interpretation of what is happening in this chemical reaction and why we're only making S-HHC. So I want you to imagine that we have a round bottom flask. We have in methanol our dissolved delta 8, and we're going to start pumping in hydrogen gas, and then with my little spatula, I'm going to dip in a little bit of my metal. This is that initial start of our cycle. We're then to the energetic isomerism. This is a really fancy way of saying, if you remember that cartoon at the beginning, we're going to have our metal either attached to the bottom or the top of that double bond of delta 8. We have our metal complexing. We're going to start pumping in more and more hydrogen gas and try to get that hydrogen to then reduce that double bond. As we do that, we go to our first transition state. This is the hydride transfer. What this is basically the rate limiting step. This is the hill that the chemical reaction has to overcome to reduce that double bond, transform from delta 8 to HHC. If it can overcome this transition state, this rate limiting step, the rest of the cycle continues. And this is where our first thought of this specific transformation is what is influencing whether we're making R or S-HHC with this catalyst. We'll go through a second transition state where we added the second proton, the reduced product, so this would be our respective HHC, is then left, and then the metal flakes of our catalyst are then able to be reused for the next catalytic cycle, and this continues. Now we'll get into this with this kind of monologuing mechanism. We're going to start getting into the computational side of it and some more visual ideas of what's going on. This is also a very busy graph, and so I'll try to take my time to walk through the whole figure. So we'll start here at A and these 4 models. And again, all we're first interested in is that initial complexation. We have our double bond. Is the metal attacking from the top, like these first 2 illustrations, or is the metal attacking from the bottom, like the second 2 illustrations? And we'll call them site A and site B for forming S-HHC, or ray A and ray B for forming R-HHC. And then B is specifically the 3D model of the interaction of site A. It is that specific model. Below are a series of numbers that are given in kcals per mole. For those that aren't computational chemists, these numbers are absolutely arbitrary, and they don't have a lot of immediate real-world use. But what is important of it is relative. And the greater the number, so we start with 0, and the numbers beside it, 6.38, basically 12. The higher the number, the more disfavored that interaction is. So to interpret the first row, this psi A interaction, so the iridium catalyst coming from the top with the phosphorus on top, is in this configuration the most likely to happen in your reaction. While the other 3 interactions, this iridium on top with the nitrogen on top, is less favored, and even further favored with this iridium coming from the bottom. So it looks like with this specific type of catalyst, the RR catalyst, we're only attacking from the top. What's interesting is, unlike what we kind of see in our experimental data, the SS catalyst, so the opposite iridium catalyst, has an interesting trend where this iridium is coming from the bottom. And this would eventually lead towards making R-HHC. But of course, we didn't see that experimentally. So if you remember back from our catalytic cycle, we're then going to have to go to that transition state. This is the hill that reaction is going to go over. And almost literally, it's like a hill we're trying to visualize here. On the left is those two interactions, the iridium coming from the bottom or the top. And they're more or less about the same in energy. So they're effectively going to be just as likely to happen. But if you can think of it in terms of like literally walking up a hill, the transition state for that first hydrogen insertion with the iridium on top is less steep. It's lower in energy versus that iridium coming from the bottom. And so if I'm walking up a hill, I'd rather go up the gentler slope versus the more steep, aggressive slope. And this is what we initially think is going on and why it's preferring only making S versus R. Of course, I've been showing you and berating you with all this organic chemistry, but that's not really very visually intuitive of what's going on. I think these models will definitely better help everyone really understand what's going on. This is the quantum models of those transition states. And so on the left is we have our metal catalyst coming from the bottom of the double bond of delta 8. And you can see this motion of that first hydride, that first proton being added to our delta 8. And on the right is that same interaction, but the metal's coming from the top. And that proton, that hydride, is being added to the double bond. And something that immediately jumps out to me as a computational chemist is steric hindrance. And steric hindrance is just how things in 3D space are bumping into each other. You can think of it like if you're playing pool. If you have two balls that bump into each other, they're going to bounce off of each other and go in different directions. And so if we look at this metal catalyst, it has a volume in space, and it's really close to that protected group of the alcohol. And so my intuition tells me, oh, these are probably bumping into each other in 3D space, and that metal catalyst is probably just being knocked off during this transition state and isn't really proceeding through the rest of the cycle. Well, the alternative, if the metal comes from the top, our metal catalyst is far away from everything. There isn't anything in 3D space that's going to bump into and knock it off. So more than likely, sterics is probably the major contributing factor to why this iridium catalyst is only making SHHC. Well, that's great and all. We have a way to make SHHC, but Garg's recipe makes RHHC, and so we want to investigate how do we make R now that we figured out how to make SHHC. And so I've performed more computational investigations. The idea being, instead of running 30 reactions in different conditions trying to eke out a product, I could simulate these chemical reactions to save time. Set up 10 reactions computationally. I don't have to use any of my time, any resources, waste management, things like that. A more traditional route for reducing double bonds might be use something like MCPDA. So we form an epoxide first and then a series of reductions to make one or the other. The main thing to take away here is that the two products that would be the result at the end of it, the difference in energy is 0.84, which for a layman means there's not any difference. You would more than likely, if you did this series of reactions, get 50-50 of R and SHHC. And the 3D model, one of those interactions is here below, just for visual eye candy. We also try to look into borohydrides. So a different reagent that would add these protons to the double bond, whether we use BH3 or 9-BBN, the energy difference, 0.28, 0.21, is not that great. Effectively, it's the same as above. If we did this reaction in reality, we'd probably get 50% R, 50% S, and this isn't what we want. Well, okay, back to the drawing board, I guess. Lots of head scratching to do. this paper in 2016 came out, and like a beacon, more or less gave us some hope in another metal catalyst that we could use to selectively make our HHC. And so while the substrate and the reaction conditions and everything they use is different from your cannabinoids, it's a bicyclic nonene. The main point is that it selectively makes one epimer. In the case here, if we imagine this double bond would be the respective reduced product in the end, it would be the methyl up, which are HHC, exactly what we want. So we have this metal catalyst. Let's start doing some investigations. Can we do this? I promise you this will be the last catalytic cycle I'll talk about. But just like before, if you can imagine, you have your round bottom flask, you have your dissolved delta 8, start bubbling in hydrogen gas, and you take your little metal flakes of catalyst and you sprinkle it in to get the reaction to go. And the two main things we want to investigate is this 2,1 insertion. And is this metal catalyst going to interact with the methylated carbon, that double bond? And this 2,1 insertion, for this specific catalytic cycle, says it's reversible. It's going back and forth. Well, of course, we want to investigate that just to make sure that if it's interacting with delta 8, the catalyst attaches to it and it doesn't move or becomes irreversible. It's stuck there. Or the continuing the cycle where the cobalt is distal to that methylated proton, it's one carbon away, and that continues the cycle, which will eventually yield our desired RHHC. So we did further quantum models of these interactions in the 1,2 insertion cycles. This is the one that continues the catalytic cycle, or the 2,1 insertion. This is that reversible, where the cobalt is directly bonding to the double bond with a methylated carbon to that double bond. And similar to this iridium catalyst, it looks like we have exactly what we want. This specific orientation is the most favorable. All other interactions require more energy, and so it's less likely for those interactions to occur. And this specific insertion would then proceed through the rest of our catalytic cycle and yielding exactly our HHC in the end. And this is where the research ends. I'm sure it's probably a similar story for most other academics and companies this year, but just different financial incentives and expectations and research interests that come up. And we're kind of at this point where we have this metal catalyst sitting. We'd like to perform further investigations into this, and does experiment match our computational results? And where we are now is here. And so I kind of like to wrap up this talk with acknowledgments. So I want to thank both my cohort and my operators at Colorado Chromatography and Sunflower for giving me the opportunity to do this kind of research. I want to thank TCG Green Chem. So without them and their collaboration, we would not gotten anywhere near our catalytic screening just by ourselves, as well as the ACS and CAN for giving me the opportunity to talk about this research and my fascinations with it. But with that, thank you for your time. Welcome any questions, comments, or concerns.
Great job, Justin. That was a really succinct way to explain a lot of very complicated organic chemistry. I think you did a great job with that.
Thank you.
From what I have seen people talking about on the internet with HHC, well, actually, first, could you go back to the slide where you were showing the differences in binding between S-HHC, R-HHC, and THC?
It should be, work with me, keyboard. This one, correct?
Yes.
All right.
Okay, so from what I have seen people say online is that HHC is generally considered to be more mild than THC and more stable. Does this binding I know this is for two specific conditions, one with related to breathing, and could you explain the other one again?
So catalepsy and hyperlocomotion is basically just how lethargic you're going to be, right? How sedentary you'll become. And so these are just comparing the two. And the 9S-HHC seems to be the less lethargic of the two epimers versus 9R-HHC. But of course, this data is not comparing it to any of the other host of all the cannabinoids, like delta 9, delta 8, THCP, etc. This is kind of where we are in this novel research area. Like delta 8 and delta 9 have a plethora of papers that investigating how it affects your body. But all these other analogs, all these research papers, for example, it's 2023, 24, 2021. I mean, this is all very emergent, and most of these are either animal surrogate studies. There's been very few actual clinical style studies in humans. I don't know if that's answered your question.
Yes, it did. It did help with it. So I'm assuming all of these other papers also, this is the largest reaction scale that, because you mentioned that some of the papers you were referencing, the recipes were making like somewhere in like the 15 milligram range. So
a lot of the academic papers, granted, they're interested in just getting extremely high purity compounds for testing. And so what you can do in a benchtop chemistry. And granted, for a lot of our experiments too, they are benchtop scale. But of course, we do have interest in scaling up. So we do have larger scale reactions that we perform. I would say that kind of sets us apart from some other more academic investigations.
Definitely. Thank you for answering my question. Looks like Nick has a question.
Hi, thank you for the talk. I was wondering if there was, other than possible catalyst performance, a reason to switch to cobalt. So, well, it's probably the hip new thing to switch to a first row transition metal catalyst.
Mm-hmm.
Would you not be concerned about introducing a significant amount of cobalt that you have to remove from these products that are presumably ingested afterward?
Oh, right. Okay. So we used to operate a lot in the cannabinoid space, making these compounds, and we would use palladium on carbon. And we would do a rather great job of separating our spent catalyst from the rest of our material for purification. Now, granted, palladium on carbon is, after purification, is a hell of a lot less toxic and dangerous than cobalt catalyst. When I talked about this at ACS Fall in DC, one of the suggestions was to, instead of looking into a protecting group for the alcohol, instead have some kind of linkage chemistry where we attach something to the alcohol to make it ether, and then that would then selectively either attack from the top or the bottom. And while I find that interesting, my initial issue is, in terms of production, every step you add to it, you didn't have to have some kind of purification, or my operators will then have to do another step afterwards. And my idea in terms of catalyst is a one-step reaction. I throw my catalyst, I sparge hydrogen, and that's the end of it. While other, like, every step that I add to it would have like a protection step, deprotection step. There's a transfer loss, there's percent yield loss, things like that. Granted, this cobalt catalyst is entirely computational. This is not experimental, so it's entirely possible it doesn't work in experiment.
Right, thank you.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yes. Granted, we're a production facility, so ultimately we would love any process that is safer, either for my operators in performing the chemistry or the final product leaving our factory floor. As for your hydrogen gas question, Steve, we have all the stainless steel and safety precautions to still operate in it. Other hydrogenation reagents would also work. Just sparging hydrogen's pretty easy. Make selectively R or S. Either isomer.
Great answers, Justin.
Thank you.
Do we have any other questions? Tara is saying that they are curious if you have any information on the cleanup that you did. Maybe one of the ones that you did experimentally.
Standard chromatography. I'm not aware of any exotic purification method that's not used anywhere else in either industry or academia.
Do you guys use preparative HPLC, or do you just do flash chromatography?
We have quite a lot of different instruments. GCMS, HPLC, CMS. We have a flash. We also, at our production scale, we have a 45 kilogram silica cartridge, and then it's a 58 or a 60 kilogram silica cartridge that we'll do large scale purification on.
Very cool. Looks like Jeremy has a question. I might have said that wrong, sorry.
Hello.
Hello.
Hi. Are you aware of the 2025 analog ban that's happening though?
I'm very aware of a lot of analog bans.
Yeah, so I'm curious what like the strategy is for that, because it would be quite sucky if you managed a good route and then had no way to monetize.
Our R&D lab is currently making a lot of analogs of not just these cannabinoid compounds, but other compounds of interest. And a reoccurring conversation in our group meetings is, well, we're really close to making a scheduled substance. So like, it's cool that we can make it, but the second we make it, we're going to knock on the door from the DEA. We really don't want that.
So it's kind of just like an arms race at this point. If you can think one step ahead and try to make an analog of an analog.
I mean, we consider ourselves a more professional company, but this is also the same song and dance that a lot of these more clandestine labs operate in, not just in the cannabinoid space, but other, psychoactive compounds.
Thank you for the talk.
Of course, you're welcome.
Do you think there's a lot of use for these specific catalyst reagents and reactions outside of cannabinoids or potentially with other cannabinoids?
I think the cannabinoid spin makes it more in vogue. If you think of it like a newspaper article, you see some long IUPAC name, your eyes glaze over. But a lot of people, when they see something that's cannabis related, it's, oh, that's cool. That's counterculture. So I think that alone gives it more attention to what it's doing. But of course, in terms of useful chemistry, we're taking a double bond and we're selectively reducing it. And in terms of just either pharmaceutical development or academic pursuits of making novel compounds, this could be useful for anything that has a double bond. Yeah, I think that answers your question.
When you pose it like that, it seems very impactful. That seems like there's a lot of potential chemistry to be done with this.
Thank you.
Do we have any more questions, last minute questions? And in the meantime, Dr. Barrett, if you want to do any shout outs or plugs to you guys' content, social media, anything like that, and we'll link it after.
Sure. I don't know if we have a true company social media presence. But for all of like our contact details for our company, when this gets posted to YouTube, I'll want to go ahead and share our website and things like that. So if you do have any further questions or want to have any kind of collaboration with our company, we would definitely welcome that.
Awesome. So if you guys need contact information, reach out to us. And thank you guys so much for joining. If there's no other questions, then we'll have 15 minutes back on today, and enjoy the rest of your Thursday.
I think I see a question.
Oh, it's Clayton.
Did I miss this? Oh, I did miss this. Totally sorry.
No.
Please.
So the palladium was not very selective. And in terms of, say, industrial chemistry, palladium's very well known to be very pyrophoric. And so that's where kind of iridium is also an in vogue catalyst. So that's kind of where that entire thought process comes from. As for separating the racemic mix, their elutions are extremely close. And sure, you can do this, say, a couple of milligrams on like a prep or a flash or something like that. But in terms of like industrial production, we have this kind of issue with one of our other products that we make in our production process, is where our desired product and some of the minor alkaloids are just right beside each other. And as you're having your elution, your first few fractions is money that's lost. It's either low potency or it's contaminated. So, well, I guess for Tara, a lot of this research is more like academic and scaling up to an industry. It's more, I guess, a concern that we have as producers with our current methodology and equipment.
I think that makes a lot of sense. It's either make a pure product or spend the time and money to purify. And sometimes, the practical answer is if you can make more of the one you actually want, that's a better bang for your buck, even if it is maybe a slightly more expensive catalyst or a longer reaction process. Okay, last call for questions again, take 2. If not, can we get some, asking about hydrogen gas again.
You have a hydrogen tank, we can sparge hydrogen. We have a par shaker that can handle high PSIs of hydrogen. Just, I don't know, buying equipment's expensive. Buying different stainless steel is expensive. Just, it's what we got on hand.
Locked in. Okay, let's give a round of applause to our speaker and thanks, Dr. Barrett.
You're welcome. It's been a pleasure nerding out about this chemistry.